Okay, Hadi.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Geoscience and Geoenergy webinar of 27 May 2021. Hope everything is well with you and your loved ones. Today we have the pleasure and honor of hosting you all, and together with our distinguished speaker, Dr. Corinna Abesser from the British Geological Survey. Corinna is a hydrogeologist and numerical modeler at the British Geological Survey with more than 18 years professional experience in environmental and energy-related research. She joined BGS in 2003 after earning an MSc in hydrogeology from the Technical University of Berlin in Germany and a PhD in hydrochemistry from the University of St. Andrews in UK. Her career included research-led and supervisory roles on projects related to resource assessment and sustainable use, environmental impacts, and policy. Since February 2018, she leads the Geothermal Energy program at the BGS, developing research programs for shallow and deep geothermal energy research, both. Her main research interests are subsurface governance and regulations, resource characterization, as well as permeability controls in different geothermal plates. It's our pleasure and honor to host you, Corinna, today. Thank you for graciously accepting our invitation. And to the audience, please note Corinna's lecture would last for about half an hour, 30 minutes, but we just had a quick chat before the webinar started. 32 minutes would be fine as well. And then after the talk, we will host, like always, discussion sessions. Sebastian will chair that part. Please do type your questions in the chat box as soon as you find an appropriate time for it. Do not wait until the end of the lecture to post your questions. Anytime you feel appropriate, please do post them, because your question may trigger other questions as well, and you would motivate other peers to actually post questions. We can't really provide any gift, but we will always provide our good wishes to those who initiate questions all the time. So Sebastian and myself become very delighted when we see plenty of questions in the chat box. So without any further ado, Corinna, the stage, the bandwidth, everything is all yours. We are grateful and delighted to have you here, especially on the very timely and important subject on geothermal energy. So please.
Thank you, Hadi. Yes, thank you for the detailed introduction. I won't have to add anything to that, and I'll jump straight into my talk. And that's on geothermal energy in the UK, past, present, future. And just to warn you, I think there will be a bias towards the research we do at BGS, as it's quite a wide field and a lot of active players in the UK. So please keep that in mind. So before I start, I thought, there's been a very detailed introduction of my person, but perhaps I'll give you a brief overview of what the British Geological Survey is as well. I'm sure you all have geological surveys in your own countries, but perhaps we might be a bit different in terms of how we're funded. So as most geological surveys, our role is impartial and independent geoscience advice, collection of data, sort of storage of data, and provision of services and provision of analytical facilities to support earth sciences. We work nationally and globally, and really undertake research to advance geoscience for the benefit of society. Where we might be different is the way we are funded. So we receive only about half, or just over, let's say 55% of our funding comes from the government through the research councils. The remainder is sort of competitively won income. So that's through research grants, very similar to like academics need to get those. And we also get sort of commissioned research as well as sort of consultancy work. So we're working in that area of academia, public goods and consultancy, which might be different from others. But so just as an introduction to BGS, and now straight into the topic of geothermal. Yet another introduction, but now on the topic. So I'd like to give you a brief overview of the terms that I'm using and the technologies that I'll be mainly focusing on. So geothermal energy really is all energy that's stored in the form of heat beneath the surface of the earth. It comes from two main sources, which is the decay of radioactive elements within the Earth's crust, and there is some remnant heat, sort of primordial heat from when the Earth was formed. Very near the surface, on the upper tens and hundreds of meters, there is a small component of heat derived from the sun, so solar radiation that's absorbed by the ground. And heat from all of these sources is stored in the rocks or soils and can be used, so exploited by different technologies. So in terms of technologies here, these are the ones that I'm mainly referring to in my talk. So and the ones that are most commonly used in the UK. There is new technologies on the way and sort of reuse of old wells. And there was a talk by Thomas Kohl, I think, where he presented some of that. If you want to go back in the series and look at that. But here I'm really going to talk about what I consider shallow geothermal technology, so anything that uses a ground source heat pump, either open loop systems, closed loop systems, or mine water systems, displayed on the left here in my graph. And on the right hand side, you have sort of the deeper systems of, I often also call it deep geothermal systems. And so hydrothermal systems, which in the UK are mainly used for heating, and you'd have to drill to 2 to 3 kilometer steps for those. And then enhanced geothermal systems or petrothermal systems, which are for power generation or combined power and heat. And in the UK, these only really work at present in the heat-producing granites, and you'd have to drill sort of 4 to 5 kilometer steps. Now, the UK might not strike you as a geothermal country. We are located at the stable foreland of Europe, so very far away from any active plate boundaries or high enthalpy systems as you might find them in Iceland or California. The last major period of volcanic activity that the UK has seen was about 50 million years ago in the Tertiary. So any igneous intrusions dating back from that time have long cooled to equilibrium temperatures. And we have very few sort of manifestations of geothermal activity, which are basically sort of restricted to two areas in here in central England, in the southwest. So you might ask, so what's our geothermal potential and why are we even bothered in the UK? Now, luckily, the geological history and some sort of the structure framework that we find has created some areas that are in fact favorable for geothermal exploration. And these can be sort of linked to a few geological events. And if you allow me to take a few minutes to talk you through those, then we'll start off with the Caledonian orogeny or mountain building phase about 500 to 400 million years ago. So this took place during what in geology is referred to Ordovician Silurian times. And essentially what happens is two continents collided, Laurentia and Avalonia, merging Scotland with England and Wales through the Iapetus suture, which you see marked here on my graph on the right. Now, the Iapetus suture really is where those continents collided and the mountain chain the size of the Himalayas formed at the time. Now, why is that relevant for geothermal? So firstly, the joining of two continents potentially produced two different heat flow provinces. Another important event was the initiation of the graben structure of the Midland Valley, which is marked in sort of a grayish blue in the top here, which was later filled with old red sandstone sediments, which have some geothermal potential at present. And another event that happened as part of the Caledonian orogeny is the emplacement of granite plutons on either side of the Iapetus suture. And so this is also a feature that has some geothermal potential and therefore is of interest to us in the UK. Now, moving on 100 million years later, sort of the Variscan orogeny, another mountain building sort of event took place. And at the time, so this event actually resulted in the creation of the supercontinent Pangaea. Europe at that time was located near the equator, and the sort of the positional settings across the continent or across Europe were dominated by a structural high, which sort of extended from Wales through East Anglia, through Belgium, the Netherlands, all the way to the Rhineland in Germany. And during that time, sort of three main events really are of relevance from a geothermal point of view. And the one was that on the flanks of that structural high, which is called the Wales-London-Brabant Massif, we get a lot of deposits in the form of carboniferous limestones accumulating on the flanks of this massif. The carboniferous limestone formed not just in the UK, but also in Belgium and the Netherlands, where they're already being exploited for geothermal uses. So they are one geothermal play that we are interested in here in the UK. As the continent drifted northwards during the Carboniferous, we also get sort of forest swamps or tropical forest swamps developing on the shores of that big landmass. And as a result of this, large extensive coal fields formed, which were later mined and which we now are interested in for mine water geothermal use. And then finally, at the end of the Carboniferous, we have another set of granite intrusions, this time only sort of in the southwest, but these are high heat producing granites. And in fact, they form what is now the zone with the highest heat flow in the UK. And then, so that was the three main points in the Variscan orogeny, but following the mountain building, there was another depositional period when the mountains eroded, and the UK drifted further north to the zone of the Sahara. So we had an extensive period during which in the Permian and Triassic, when there were vast amounts of sort of desert sandstone being deposited in extensive fault-controlled depositional basins. And these are marked here in the sort of slightly yellowish-orangey color, and we see them all around the UK, sort of East Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, Wessex, Worcester, Cheshire, etc. And these sandstones these perma-Triassic sandstones are actually one of the major low enthalpy resource in the UK. Now, in summary, we might not be the best country in terms of sort of steaming hot springs and geysers, but there is a few resources here in sedimentary basins, mainly carboniferous limestone and perma-Triassic sandstone. We have potential in the radiothermal granites, specifically southwest, but also the Caledonian ones. And then the mine water geothermal systems are a potential resource, as well as ground source energy, which you find almost anywhere. You find anywhere in the UK, and you can employ it almost. Sorry, I lost my word. You can extract or sort of use them almost anywhere in the UK. Now, so this is now the background. I just want to look at what sort of research and exploration has taken place in the past of these systems. And really sort of up until the early 70s, the focus of geothermal energy has really been on high temperature resources. In the 1970s, however, with the sort of taps being turned off with the oil crisis, there was increasing interest also in lower temperature resources. And in the UK, the fourfold increase in oil prices forced, firstly, the formation of the Department of Energy, which then immediately initiated research into the geothermal resources in the UK. And so what happened was the UK Geothermal Energy Programme came about. It was funded by this newly formed Department of Energy as well as by the European Commission. And really the research that was of interest here looked at three main areas, and the one was sort of an appraisal of the heat flow and the investigation of the geothermal potential of the sedimentary basins or sedimentary aquifers, and then the more detailed investigations of the radiothermal granites and their use for enhanced geothermal systems. And while I remember, I might as well just say these enhanced geothermal systems used to be called hot dry rock. So I might use this term interchangeably, so just to avoid any confusion. And then the last point was really of that program, an overall evaluation of the UK geothermal resource. The legacy, so I mean, in terms of the questions at the time, or if we want to call them science questions, it was around heat flows, where is the potential, and what is the resource. The legacy of this program were sort of extensive data sets. So I've got a few sort of books and publications shown here at the Geothermal Catalogue of heat flow measurements and temperatures, heat flow data, obviously, then heat flow maps, as well as sort of drilling of wells for measuring these flows and temperatures, as well as drilling of wells for of exploration boreholes. So another main output of obviously was first estimate of the resource. This has been updated various times since the 1980s, and here is an updated estimate that is but essentially based on those originally collected data. On the left, also, before I forget to say, is a heat flow map of the UK, which is also an output from those early investigations in the 1980s. So in terms of resource for heat, the estimated resource is 328 exajoules, and that can be thought of as about 100 years of heat supply for the entire UK, given current demand. It's worth pointing out that this only really looked at the heat resource in the Permo-Triassic sandstones. And the reason being is that in order to estimate a resource, you need to have some knowledge of the aquifer properties. So in terms of permeability and porosity in those rocks. I can refer back to another talk in the series by Professor Jaya Falconi, who did sort of give a talk about how you estimate a resource. I'm not going to go into this here, but for the carboniferous limestone, it is extremely difficult to estimate the aquifer properties because their fracture control rely on paleokarst and therefore are really heterogeneously distributed. And we purely have too few data to come up with a resource estimate for that play. And even I know that in the Netherlands, as I already mentioned, carboniferous limestone is exploited, and there's a much better understanding of the subsurface and visualization of the subsurface. And even there, the Dutch Geological Survey have not dared to approach it and come up with a resource estimate. Now for power, here is the theoretical power potential calculated to a depth of 9.5 kilometers, and it's massive. So it's 375,200 exajoules. And if only 2% of this resource is developed, then the UK can have a free energy supply for 1,200 years. Well, obviously that is currently not accessible and might never be accessible in full. But if you look at where we are with our technical abilities and sort of drilling to about 4.5 to 5 kilometers depth and generating power from anything that's hotter than 175 degrees centigrade, then the resource is still 2,280 megawatts for power generation. I already mentioned the exploration wells that were drilled at the time. So most of these were used for sort of for testing and for determine the hydrogeological property of the aquifer, and they were mainly decommissioned after that program was finished, except for one well in Southampton, which is still open, and the council at the time wanted to use that as part of their district heating scheme. So that well is still in operation now. It's operated as a sort of public-private partnership between the council and the energy company. It's only one well which extracts temperatures of 76 degrees from nearly 2 kilometers depth, and then extracts the heat and discharges the water at 28 degrees into the sea. The scheme is small, 2 megawatts, but it makes an important contribution to Southampton District Energy Scheme, and has been operational since the 1980s. And has quite clearly demonstrated that geothermal is possible in the UK, or geothermal heat development. Another scheme I want to mention here, another research program that happened at the time, sort of 30 years ago, was the Hot Dry Rock Research and Development Program, again funded by the Department of Energy and the European Commission. And really that was specifically looking at how to build sort of heat exchanger in rocks that don't have natural groundwater circulations, like the granites. So the granites are heat producing in Cornwall, so they are really one place where we find high temperatures quite near the surface. And a number of wells were drilled up to a depth of 2.6 kilometers, where 100 degrees were achieved at the time. The outcomes or the results were equivocal in terms of whether or not hot dry rock or enhanced geothermal systems work. So, and certainly separate studies said that it's unlikely to be technically or commercially viable in the short to medium term. And the recommendation was that to sort of shelf the sort of hot dry rock in the UK indefinitely. Not a good outcome for hot dry rock. But overall, I think the program did show that geothermal resources exist and can be developed. Now, that was 30 years ago. Let's look at where we are now in the UK. Obviously, the field has changed in that there is much more focus now also on the shallower, lower temperature resources, and we see that they are the ones that are most developed in the UK. So we have just above 38,000 systems, ground source heat pump systems installed. We have 6 operational mine geothermal schemes, and there is, I know of at least another 6 that are being developed. Interestingly, even though the sort of enhanced geothermal systems weren't thought to be a good idea, that these are the ones who have progressed, and there's 2 schemes being developed in the UK at the moment, one at United Downs and one at the Eden Geothermal Project. And there are so Eden has just started drilling a couple of weeks ago, and the United Downs projects will soon start pumping, which means that for the first time in about 50 million years there will be sort of geothermally heated steam coming up at the surface. So that should be very interesting development to watch. And then in terms of hydrothermal, there have been feasibility studies, but unfortunately none of them have progressed to the drilling stage. So we're pretty much still where we were about 30 years ago with that one. In terms of research questions, we said earlier it was sort of what's the heat flow, where's the resource, and how much is there. They have broadened out as well as you will expect. So obviously resource characterization is still very, very important and still pursued and still being undertaken. However, there is much more focus now also on sort of environmental impact, how to monitor the systems, the risk of systems interference, as well as sort of sustainable management and regulations. And I've highlighted a few questions here about, best practice. How do you regulate heat? How do you license heat? As well as subsurface governance in a sort of subsurface that gets increasingly crowded by energy users, as well as sort of general infrastructure. Now, BGS is still sort of active in this area, and we still do undertake resource characterizations. And perhaps interesting to note is that the resources that we look at have slightly changed from what we looked at 30 years ago. Here's an example on the left of looking at the heat that accumulates beneath cities from heat-emitting infrastructure buried in the ground, or from the city being there, and from all the surface sealing, which actually impacts not just temperatures in the city, but also in the subsurface. And this is an example of Cardiff, where you see that temperatures are quite increased in pockets around the city above what we would normally expect. Another area that's been of interest in terms of resources are mines, and here's an example of a recent piece of work undertaken by BGS, where we mapped sort of temperatures in the different coal fields in the UK and at different depths. And obviously that is an important piece of knowledge if you want to estimate the resource that is contained in those systems. And on the far right here, we have gone back to deep geothermal resources, and we're very interested in looking at the Carboniferous limestone, because we do, it has been exploited elsewhere, and we do think it is an important resource in the UK, but we just need to get a better understanding of it. And the way we approach it is by using technologies or methods that are quite commonly used in oil and gas exploration. Here's an example of play fairway analysis and various ways of uncertainty quantification. And we hope that we can make de-risk the Carboniferous limestone play further by applying these methods to existing and new data. I've talked about environmental impacts and understanding how systems operate, and BGS, we're really quite keen, or we do believe that research observatories are an important step in understanding these various aspects. And here's an example of an observatory in a mine water system that BGS has been commissioned to set up and to build. This is paid for by the Research Council, the Natural Environmental Research Council, and is available to any scientist who's interested in investigating mine water geothermal processes. The site consists of sort of three main well clusters at different depths, and is instrumented with sort of fiber optics, ERT, so a range of sort of physical, geophysical, and sort of temperature and water chemistry sampling kits. Another observatory that we have is here in Wales, in Cardiff, where it's really looking at the urban geothermal resource, and we have 61 monitoring sites which monitor water levels and temperatures. And you've already seen the map of the temperature map of Cardiff, but the city itself is very well characterized in terms of its geology, how water moves, which we'll explore through numerical models. And really excitingly, we do have an instrumented ground source heat pump system there, where the ground around it is instrumented as well as the system itself. So we can actually look at the interaction between operation of these systems, the thermal footprint, and also sort of it can go as far as the human behavior aspect and how that impacts on system efficiency and ground temperatures. So that's sort of the research, maybe some highlights that we do at the moment. there is more obviously, but I want to go back to these numbers, looking at where we are with geothermal exploration or exploitation in the UK. And as many other countries, we like to compare ourselves. So let's have a look at how we're doing in the European context. A graph here on the right-hand side of the installed capacity in 2016 in Europe. So the blue bars are geothermal electricity, so power generation, and the red ones are direct use heating. Now you'll see that UK has a small 2 megawatts, which is the Southampton scheme, no electricity as yet. But compared to our neighbors, Germany, France, and the Netherlands, you see France has sort of nearly 500 megawatts. The Netherlands have over 100, and Germany has over 300. So displayed in a different way here for power. If you're looking at where we stand in the sort of ranking, this is for power. We are actually quite a long way away from the neighbors we can compare ourselves with in that context. So France and Germany are quite high up the list, while the United Kingdom sort of potters around the bottom. May I point out that this also, the orange bars you see here are actually the ambition, the plan, what the individual country thinks where there will be in 2025. And if you look at the UK, we're not going to be very far according to this graph. Similar for heat, the UK here circled in red again is quite low down the bottom compared to, let's say, the Netherlands and France, which are sort of 3rd and 6th, I think, on this list here. Now, what's different between, let's say France, Germany, and Netherlands and the UK? And there's various reasons. So I've been looking at what's the national ambition or national strategic objectives, and what's the financial support that's been offered. And I don't want to go into too much detail here, but what I want to say is that the countries who do well have got some kind of strategic objectives and roadmaps for geothermal, which the UK hasn't, unfortunately. So Germany is an exception, but it's the geothermal developments there are driven on the federal level, so or by individual cities. And if you want a really inspiring example, go and search geothermal Munich, and you'll find an example of how the city and its utility really driven the development of a vast large-scale geothermal exploitation there. One thing also here in my graph towards the right are various support measures like subsidies, risk-sharing, insurances, or schemes, as well as sort of financing supports that are available in the various countries. And you might see that for the UK currently, the only incentive for deep geothermal that is available is the contracts for difference scheme that only applies for power. We had a renewable heat incentive for heat, but that has finished in March, and there's been no announcement as to how that is going to be replaced. And at the moment, there isn't a replacement. So there isn't a lot of support for geothermal development, unfortunately. I'll speed this up a bit. So for ground-source heat pumps, a similar story. Here, the good news is there has been an increase in the number of systems by more than 10%, but with an overall installed capacity of 38,000 systems, that really the number is we've increased by 4,000 schemes a year. If you can look at Germany, the installation rate there is about nearly 25,000 schemes a year. So quite a difference. A quick look again, I think I'm going to make the same point here, just a bit quicker, is what's driven that development. And I've marked here how ground-source heat pump sales in Germany progressed, and you'll see that 2 green lines I've put in where when incentives changed, or when incentives for ground-source heat pumps were introduced. And you can see to the right of these graphs, there's an immediate sort of rise of installation, of sales in this case. So incentives are important, is the point I want to make. And looking at the ambitions that the UK has, we have, in fact, a recent energy white paper proposed that we will have 600,000 heat pump installations a year by 2028. The ground-source heat pump industry thinks that they have maybe sort of 10 to 20% share of that, which would mean a 15 to 30-fold increase. Now, how are we going to do this? If you're looking at the incentives that exist at the moment, I've already said that the heat incentives for large schemes or non-domestic schemes has stopped. Another grant that existed that would have supported ground-source heat pump has been prematurely cancelled, and so we are left with the domestic renewable heat incentives, which has been updated to work quite well for ground-source heat pumps, but it will run out in a year's time, and there has been no announcement as to how this will be replaced. So currently a huge amount of uncertainty, which I think hinders the industry from making any sort of investment. So yes, this is where we are. I think the last section has shown that the UK has potential, but it's not doing as well as it could in terms of its geothermal resources, especially when compared to its sort of neighbours. The three main reasons for this, in my view, are a lack of technology awareness, a lack of ambition and strategy of how we're going to use our geothermal resources, and then linked to that, like a lack of adequate financial and legislative support. So how will the geothermal develop in the future? I would say it very strongly depends on how well we can address these challenges. So innovation and research, of course, will be playing an important role. We know we have a resource. We have got schemes that are coming online. And so I hope there will be some raising of awareness. But I think that's also the role of research and industry to support the raising of awareness, ensure we get a public license to operate for geothermal, and define a UK ambition as to what we want to achieve. How can geothermal contribute to decarbonisation? And then back that up with a strategy and policy support, as well as licensing and regulations. So really, what I'm arguing for is a UK geothermal roadmap that defines how we get from today to net zero with a geothermal component. And as part of this, what we need to include is sort of what's the target, how much geothermal do we want to use, when do we want to reach our targets, and then what support, research, financial support we're going to offer to get there. And that's it. Thank you very much. So here are my colleagues who have contributed to the work that I've been showing, and a list of references. And sorry, I'm over time, I just realized. So if you have any question, then please, I look forward to answering it.
Thank you very much, Corinna, for this very interesting talk. While the questions are being typed in, if Sebastian would allow, I would like to squeeze a question before handing over the microphone to you, Sebastian, if that's okay.
Of course, yes.
Okay, you spoke about the past, current, and future in UK, and there are some similarities you already mentioned between some countries in the neighborhood and perhaps even farther, like across the Atlantic or Australia and other countries. Every country has its own kind of complexity with energy transition. In what aspects you see that a community of all the different geosciences, different locations could benefit from each other and collectively develop? And in what aspects they are really challenges that are really problem-specific, location-specific, and it may not be really translatable to other settings?
I mean, so yes, you're right, and that every country is going its own journey in how it gets to net zero, and it's very controlled by the status quo, what is there already. I think in the UK, in terms, there's different pressures in different countries. So let's say Germany is a very coal-dependent country, And coal is obviously more sort of on the scale of things more polluting than gas. So there is a different driver there than in the UK. The UK also has benefited largely from offshore wind, and that's been sort of seen, it's helped with the decarbonisation of electricity. So there is not so much. So there is already something we can use. So we don't have to sort of see if we can get geothermal to work from that aspect. There is, however, a lot of commonalities in terms of similar problems that different countries face, and it is around. I mean, obviously, there's the whole research side of it, the kind of understanding the geology, de-risking the different plays, understanding what methods to use to reduce the risk. Make it cheaper to drill, less risky. All of that is stuff that can be worked on together internationally, as well as sort of. I mean, there's a whole lot around policy and regulation and how you license this. There's interesting discussions there as well. I don't know if I answered your questions.
You did actually. It also plus the cultural sensitivities here in the Netherlands, for example. De-risking is a major topic in whatever you do in the subsurface. I would assume in the UK it would be the same too. So these sort of things also to include it in the technical aspect of our development does not seem to be quite straightforward. But would that be also a plan for the different countries to actually share experiences in that aspect as well?
Yeah, most certainly. I think there is already quite a few projects sort of going on the European level. There is great sharing of experiences and knowledge from different countries. And I'm really pleased that the UK remains eligible to bid into these projects because I think that is a real good. That is exactly as you say. It's knowledge sharing and exchange is a key component, and not just within geothermal, also between sort of the different technologies, because a lot of the geological questions are similar between different energy technologies.
Absolutely. Very nice. I have plenty more questions, but I'd rather just give it back to the chair of the discussion, and if he allows, I can speak again back. So,
but I'm going to sneak in a question myself later, Hadi. I'm passing over the questions to the audience for the time being. So. Yuan Wang, one of our regular viewers, asked a question. Could you comment on how the overall heat potential is estimated, especially considering its sustainability? So a technical question for you.
Yeah, I would like to refer you back to Jaya Falcone's talk on the estimation of the resource, because that's nothing I have too much knowledge of. But in terms of sustainability, that's a good question, and that really depends on that goes back to the question of how you license and regulate, and we don't have experience in the UK with that because we don't license the heat resource. But I think obviously you need to consider it because especially in the sort of urban context. You can immediately see that if you're not looking at sustainability and how much each system is taking out, that you end up interfering or nicking each other's resources. I mean, I think I've hoped, and I'm not sure I don't think I answered your question. But in terms of the resource, I would refer you back to Jaya's talk because she explained it quite well.
Okay, so there's something, Yuan. To go back and watch, or as we said in the chat, all talks are archived on YouTube, so you can watch it over and over again until you understood it. We have a question from Brian, and I think this is Brian Mackwood, one of the head MSc students now, Subsurface Energy Systems MSc. Yes, how is the BGS helping to develop the geothermal resource in Northern Ireland? Is there interaction, collaboration with Geological Survey of Northern Ireland?
Yes, certainly. So. We are, in the way they are not, well, how do you explain it? So BGS and have enough, well, GS and I don't want to say it's part of BGS, but it's closely linked. They've paid by a different body, but we are so essentially working together as one organization. And there is great developments in Northern Ireland, and they have a webinar series of their own on developments on how to progress geothermal energy in Northern Ireland. They have a very capable team of hydrogeologists and geothermal experts there as well, and we do exchange knowledge between the two organizations, the wrong word, between the two offices. And so we do have an input there, and they draw on our data and knowledge as much as they can as well.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, apologies if I don't, Willemijn van Rooyen.
It's if I make say Willemijn.
Willemijn, okay, thank you, Hardy. This is the two non-Dutch speakers trying to get this right. So thank you for the nice presentation. What would you consider as the biggest technical challenges currently in the UK with respect to geothermal?
Biggest technical challenge, I mean, the drilling remains, so the highest cost and the highest risk is in the drilling. So I think it's about 60 to 70% of your overall cost is in drilling and developing and testing your well. So I would say that remains the biggest challenge, is drilling a well and finding the yields and temperatures that you need for the size of scheme that you want to develop. And I don't think that's specific to the UK. I'd probably say that unless you're in sort of an Iceland perhaps, but like I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's similar in the Netherlands and Belgium and other countries with similar geology.
Yeah, certainly I have heard similar numbers there. I would like to follow up on a question myself. So stepping away from the geoscience and technological challenges, how do you convince communities in the UK, the towns, the cities, to invest into geothermal energy and get over this not in my backyard philosophy that, yes, we want to drive energy transition forward, but if it affects myself and if I have the drill rig in the countryside or down the street, I'm very uncomfortable with this. So what do we need to do from a societal point of view to make geothermal energy a success?
So from what we've seen so far, I think so geothermal energy is quite widely accepted in this on the sort of national scale. There isn't a high level of awareness, but those who are aware are quite accepting. So I think really what is important is a conversation right from the start, and it needs to be in. Community needs to be involved in the decision making, and decision making needs to be transparent. So there is risks with geothermal, and don't hide them. Just be honest about the risks. Be honest about that there will be a drilling rig. But I think what we've seen is that sometimes people have perceptions that aren't true. So convince them otherwise, and that you can only do that by showing people, addressing their concerns, talking to them, taking them seriously, and I think I'm hoping that that will bring people on board. And the NIMBY, not in my backyard sort of attitude, I think also it's been kind of used as a derogative term, but I do feel we all have a NIMBY in us, and I really probably recognize that, and just make sure that if someone has concerns, they are consulted and addressed. And of course, that you can't please everyone, but as long as you keep the majority on board, I think we'll be fine.
So, do you think we need success stories
Oh, yeah.
project or Cornwall or say Glasgow, where there's a big issue with fuel poverty and getting the coal mine geothermal working. You have these really clear success stories of safe operation, changing the environment to get a broader acceptance.
Absolutely. I think sort of technology demonstrators or operational projects where people can see what it looks like, you know, what it feels like and what it does are really important. And we see that in, you know, in Germany and in the Netherlands. That's what kicked it off. I think the fact that not just the public, but also government, investors, and the whole sort of value chain could see it's working. And so, yes, absolutely. So hopefully, that's why I was, it's the double thing, isn't it? You raise awareness, and then there'll be less perceived risk and there'll be more investment, so you get more schemes. So I think once you have a few operational schemes, it can snowball into quite a good development. But I think in order to get to that, over that first hurdle of it, you need some support. Financial support is really important, and in those really immature stages of the market, when investors haven't got confidence, when it is perceived as high risk. And I mean, and a good example for the UK is wind. The government really supported early wind farm developments, and then investors stepped in, and now we have, we have decarbonized a considerable amount of our electricity because of the success in offshore wind. So that's a case I try to give as an example of how we want to see geothermal develop. So yeah, fingers crossed that we'll have operational schemes soon and they're all successful.
We have a question from Thomas Finkbeiner, who is joining us from sunny, I assume it's sunny Saudi Arabia at Kaust. He asked, do you think geothermal would find more interest or its investment combined with lithium and other mineral extraction from brine?
I mean, it would certainly help the business case or the economic case if you could produce lithium or other rare earth elements on the site. And I mean, we are quite, and I guess Thomas knows that the UK is quite well positioned for that, because the Cornish granites actually have one of the world's highest concentration of lithiums in the geothermal brine. So yes, my answer is yes to your question, and I know Germany is looking at the same. I think it's called the white gold, isn't it? That will support. That's co-produced there. So yeah, there's a few quite exciting projects ongoing, and let's see if they work.
A comment here from Gregor Götze, who says it's interesting to see that there are more activities in EGS than hydrothermal in UK. So I don't know if you want to reply to that comment, Corinna.
Yeah, I mean, and I couldn't possibly guess why. I think it's really down to very dedicated community in Cornwall who has driven the developments and has secured funding from the European Union to do this. So the European regional development funds have been really instrumental in supporting the development down in Cornwall. And I mean, it is interesting that if going back to these earlier studies, the conclusion was, yeah, hydrothermal works, but EGS doesn't. And now we're seeing almost the reverse, where, we've got potentially, looking a few years ahead, we'll have more EGS schemes than hydrothermal. There have been feasibility studies looking at various plays, and they've never quite got to the drilling stage. And I don't know the details, but I suspect it is investor confidence, and maybe that So I think that getting the funding from the European Union was probably instrumental in Cornwall.
I just got a message from Thomas Finkbeyer now, who says it's sunny and humid in Saudi Arabia at Coast at the moment. So we get a real life weather updates as well.
In the UK, yeah, sunny.
Yeah.
Well, in the south.
It's winter here in Delft.
It stopped raining in Scotland, luckily. So we have time for one more question. I'll bring up Sarah's question. Says, thank you for the presentation. Do you consider the problem of induced seismicity an issue for geothermal projects?
Yeah, it is. There is a risk of induced seismicity. It's happened. We all know the examples. So yeah, I think, and I think that's one of the risks we need to be very honest about. There is ways of mitigating this risk, and this is another discussion where I think we should involve the public to gain their confidence that the right things are being done. So and I mean the geothermal schemes have risk mitigation monitoring. Monitoring of induced seismicity and strategies to mitigate that risk. But yes, there is a risk. It varies from area to area. Munich, for example, sort of the Molasse Basin seems to have less of a problem, but the Rhine-Graben seems to have more, and I probably upset a whole lot of people saying that. But there is areas that are more prone to it than others. Let's put it that way. But the risk needs to be assessed when you develop a scheme, obviously, and managed.
And Sarah, I think we had quite a few talks on induced seismicity in the webinar. So if you want to go through the back catalog, there's really some.
Her PhD subject is on induced seismicity.
Okay. So yeah, I think we're running out of time here on the question side. So thank you very much, Corinna, for a really nice talk. Thank you for the audience for some really interesting questions. And Hardy, over to you with some last announcement for next week.
Yes, thanks very much, everyone. Take the chance. Next week, 3rd of June, we will host Larry Lake from UT Austin. Larry will give a lecture about outcrops to models, a short introduction to geology for engineers. Until next week, 3rd of June, stay happy, healthy, and tuned into our geoscientific and geoenergetic channel. We will host Professor Larry Lake and you all with great pleasure. Thank you very much, Corinna. It was a great talk, and we will see a lot of new developments in geothermal and green energy, more and more in geoscience domain. Have a nice week. And enjoy your summer, by the way. It's winter here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.